Hello guys, this is James, and today we are not gonna code, but we will talk about something very important prior to code. Any days, there's a question pop out suddenly like, how can you design a to-do list? We know that to-do list is something we use daily, right? And here I just draw some illustration about the to-do list. Here is the input box, and here is the add button. You click add, then the item will be add here in the list. And there's two functions of it. You can, if you finish, you just click, right? Then it will be like this. And if you say, okay, I don't want this anymore, you just delete it, then it will disappear. And of course, you can have various items here. So the question again, how to design it? Well, if we encounter a question like this, what will pop out in our mind is the two things: design of the data structure and the component design, because we are using Vue. So we have to break down it into different components. I think that's something easy to understand, right? And how about data structure design? How we really organize the data is something very crucial. It's not just something the front end will deal with. Also, when the backend also have to think of it, because when the database is designed, and then it also should consider that, okay, how it really can have the better interface with the front end. I think in any companies, prior to writing any codes, engineer will discuss sitting at a table and to discuss how to make things right. And then let's first talk about the data structure design. We have, I have listed already, we have three principles here. First, we have to distinguish what is data and what is function, because sometimes it's a little bit easy to get confused of them. For instance, the input box and add, it is a function or data. It's not data, it's function, because we want to, on the browser, we want to say that we can put something in the input box, we can add it. So that's really the function of it. But the item 1, item 2, and item 3, they are really the data, because those things is what should be, it's the object of those functions, how to deal with it, whether we check it or delete it. And that's really the essential data we got. And of course, as I mentioned, the checkbox and the DEL, that's the function. So that's not the data. All right. The first thing we have to distinguish data. Then we'll think how to structure the data. We can, maybe the item, we can structure it like a string. Yeah, we can structure the data string, but we will think that if it's a string, how we can make a list, right? We still have to convert the string to maybe a array, or object, or something like that. So of course, making it a string is obviously not convenient for us to structure the data. So the data can be easily used in our codings, right? There's a way to, since it's a list, so I think the better way to structure it is item. It should be an array, and each array have its properties. We use the project to set up these properties, like the number. That's very crucial, right? To distinguish among different items, we have to use the something to distinguish. The second one is the name, that is the content of the item. The third property is to set up whether the item is checked or not. So we can use something like finish. So it's a Boolean type. So we can say that, okay, the item is done or not. That's also another property we can set. All right, that's how we really structure the data. Use something like array or object. Then we go to the third principle, expandable. All right, let me have a little sum up of the three principles. The first one, we have to really distinguish which are the data, because that's the target. We have to really design the structure for it. And the second, we have to know that we should use something easier to make the data to be called. So we really have to think of a better structure of the data. The third one, we have to think the data will be expandable, because we have to think for the future. What is really the way to expand the data? And all based on the three principles, we have to design the certain patterns of the data. And as in our example, to use something array plus object can be a good way. All right, let's go to the component design. When we use Vue or even the other two popular MVVM, JavaScript framework, Angular and React, we all have to break down the whole complicated functionality into different components. And also, I have to mention that in the last videos, we talk about how to polyfill the form components in the element UI. We talk about something we have to do is to focus on the reusability, because we have to make sure that this component can be reused, so there will be less dependency. Remember, we have said that the slot is a way to make each component less dependent with each other. All right, and today we'll also have to talk about it. And let's say our first principle, breakdown by functionality. We can see that, for instance, the to-do list, it has the full functionality, but still it can be break down. I'll just mark it here. The input box is something just in charge of the input. That's one functionality. Okay, we just put it. And then the second, it's a list. This is just making like a container to contain different items with this design. Okay, and the third in one, it's just item, because the item is not just long, it has its checkbox and the delete buttons here. So we also have to make it like a lot of functionality, and everything we should really wrap it here. I just make it more obvious. All right, that is our component. We really break it down to the smaller ones and based on the functionality. And here we can really see that I have right. So when we design everything already like this, we can really, in the wrapper, right, in the outmost app, we can really write the structure of component. First, it has the input box. So we put the input here, and it has a list. That's the whole list we put here. And there's some children in the list. That's the list item. There are three list items. We just put three list item here. So that's how we really define our component. And then the last thing very important is that how we really combine the data with those components. There's one principle very important, that we deal with the data just in one component. And also we create all the events that might happen in one component combined with data. And then if other events want the data, okay, get from us. You just retrieve the data from that component. Oh, so what's the functionality of other components? They are just doing something about the UI, I mean the interface with the user. So if you add something, you put something here, okay, it serves as the interface of the user, right? It can allow the user to act. And also the check box and DL, it's just interact with the user. All right, that's something we just interact with user. Then when we should put our data, that's something important. We have to put it or usually in the app or the outermost wrappers. We put our data there. We put our functions of the events there, because in this case, there are different events that happen. And once we click on add, it just gather the data and then send the event to the wrapper, and the wrapper receive it and said, okay, now it's time we need to add the things in our data base or in our data, right? And then if we delete or if we check the box, do the checkbox here, then we can see that, okay, it's time to erase this item, or it's time to set the finish to be true, etc. Right? Like the data center, everything just communicated with it. And how we communicate it, then that's the topic of how we use the 7 or even more ways to communicate among different components in our last video. So that's kind of the chain of the knowledge we have connect one to each other. And that's the first example. And then let's go to this. I hope, right? The most important is what I have right on the right part, how we can design the data structure and how we can design the component. That's the principle. Okay, now let's go to the second one about a shopping cart. I mean, it's universally used in many places. In every place, you should design a shopping cart. And our shopping cart is quite easy. The first, it just make the list of item 1, item 3, and item 4 and the price. If you click on the add, it can be add in the second line, in the second container. So we add to item 2. So it showcase that, okay, the number we added is 2. And then we can also, in the second container, we can add it or we can delete it, right? I mean, if we click on the plus, it will add 1. If we can click on the minus, it will deduct by 1. And then the last one is total, how much we have spent, right? Maybe there's even, button like checkout or buy, etc. And how we can design it. So always remember that the first thing we have to do is to design the data structure. So what's the data? Okay, how to distinguish the data from the functionality? I think we all know that. The item 1, item 2, item 3, they are the data. And also even right in our own shopping cart, how many items we have really add here. It's obviously we have to create like a data type, something like that. And as we talk about it, it should be structured data, means that the data can be easily be used by our coding. The second thing is it has to expandable. So we can still adopt the method of using arrays inside arrays as object to describe the properties. The first one I think we can write here is, right? That's the item of all the item. We just call it items, and it should be an array. And then it can include the number because that's something we have to identify different items. And then the item name. And the second thing, the price. And something we can add is there's always inventories. If it is depleted, then we cannot add anything more. So maybe we can add something like inventories. And in the future, we can expand other things. That's the first thing. And the second is our cart. This one, it has the number. The first number is the ID, okay? We just name it ID to identify different ones. The second is number, means how much we have get. And is there anything we can add? We can also add price or add the item name, etc. But we don't have to, right? Because the database, so we really don't overlap with each other. So it can even make the database smaller. So later, if we want, there's some interaction between the two data type, of course, we just use our codes to make it happen. So that's basically what we have defined here, our data structure. It is expandable and it can be easily be used by the code. All right, and let's go to the second thing about component breakdown. Or we use component design. How we really design the component, as we see that, the first thing I just write a big wrapper here. And obviously there are two functionalities. The first one is here. And the second is here. And of course, the fourth one, actually the total is just calculated by the thing we added. So it's rather serves as a function and a ladder functionality. So, and it can be just in the, we can put it in another components, all right, but also we can just include it in the outermost wrapper because it's just something simple and it's just the calculation of all the data. Since later we will talk about the wrapper, still we make it just like a container for the data. So it's very convenient. We just put totals in the outer wrapper. And then we still haven't break down because our principle is automation. we can still break it down to the smaller one, this item, and there's something like this. So in each one, we have the different items. One way to write it will be app, the out wrapper, and the inside, there's we said the maybe item list. In the item list, there's item, right? And another thing is there's our cart list. And in the cart list, there's item, cart. So we can distinguish from the above item. So that's the structure. We just design something like this. Also, there's another way, right? If we want to combine this, because there's some similarity between this item and this item. So we really want to reuse this one. We can just make the two things, both of them called item. Then later we just display or not display based on the properties of it. So we have defined something to identify whether it's in our cart or whether it's the item, I mean, in the of the whole inventory. But it will make things a little bit complicated. I think it is just to make it better, right? Just make a 3-tier, the outer wrapper apps, the in the middle, the item list, and inside each list. And then the last thing, very important, how we can combine the component design with data structure. I have already noted here. We just make the out wrappers to have include all the data and all the events that might be invoked in the future. So when to invoke those events? If we click on add, if we click on plus or minus, it will invoke those should be the 3 occasions to evoke the event. Okay, maybe there's another one regarding inventory. Define the storage number or the inventory there. So maybe if there's a deplete of the inventories, we can make the grid cannot be, be add already here. So that's also another event. So again, how to involve the data structure in the component. In the outer wrapper, we just put all the events and the data inside. The outer wrapper will manage everything. Actually, it's also reflected in our last video. We also put the data structure and the other events in our outer wrapper, right? Then other than this outermost wrapper, other components will decide, okay, which moment I will use the data, I will modify the data, and which moment I will call the events. I think that's for today. And this topic, I think, compared to coding, it's equally important because that's the first step when we just analyze how we design a page, how we really design the data structure, and then how we can break down everything to components. Only by handling this, we can maybe make a clear picture of how we can design the whole full-blown web page. So the next thing what we have to do is to keep on practicing. So that's for today, and thanks for watching.